Howdy, folks, and welcome to Moose Podcast 174. Thank you so much for dropping by, for your support, and to so many of you for telling others about the podcast. I can't thank you enough. My deepest gratitude as the numbers keep growing and I get more and more people telling me they heard it about the podcast from their friend. That means you. So thank you so much. Also want to thank my good friends at Bedford Camera, bedfords.com. You know, the new Nikon D870 came out. There's a trade-in program, and the folks at Bedford are there waiting to help you, not only with, just basic questions, but getting gear in your hands when you need it. And remember that whether you call them or you check out, make sure you give them the Moose discount code MOOSE for that 5% off the price. As well as, free shipping for anything over $99. And of course, most states no sales tax. But, these guys at Bedford, they do a great job. They get me gear when I need it. Great advice and really, really nice folks to talk to. So make sure you give them a call and say, thanks for sponsoring the Moose Podcast. Let's get right into this week's episode. Editorial Arrangement. I'm very fortunate to take out some very gifted photographers and we go out shooting together. And the goal is pretty simple, of course, is to have a ton of fun. Now, if we get some amazing images along the way, well, that's really kind of the icing on the cake. Now, the biggest part of the process of not only my own personal growth as a photographer and a person, but also as, these other photographers' growth as a photographer is a conversation. Now, that conversation begins many different places between you and the camera and the subject and you. All of that is a conversation. And one of the things that comes up a lot is composition. Now, if you've listened to the podcast or read my website, I just hate that word composition because it takes you to places, well, really, as a photographer, really hard to go. If you're an artist, you have a paintbrush and you can put elements where you want, then some of these rules can really help because you can follow those rules. But if you're a photographer, I don't know about you, but not very often do rocks and rabbits and planes and coins, do they just happen to fall into place as per these rules? More often, you have to arrange those elements to make that story come true. And that's why I call it arrange elements rather than composition, because you're an active part of this proposition. It's not just like, ta-da, there's a composition and you have to take the picture and you're golden. No, you have to arrange the elements. You have to move left and move right, up and down, change focal lengths, change f-stop for depth of focus. There's a lot of different things as a visual communicator with a camera you have to do to arrange the elements in that viewfinder to make the photograph happen. Now, with that said, and if I don't believe in things like, rules and thirds and stuff like that, it's not that I don't believe in them. It's just that I don't, I've yet to have the bald eagle, just line up in the frame and just look at me and go, okay, rule of thirds, take the picture. It doesn't work that way, especially when they're on the wing. So how do I go about arranging those elements? What guide do I use? Well, my guide is not one that I invented, not one that I, was given at birth. There's not one that any other way than beaten between my eyes and, smacked on the head with that I get to work with. And that's the way it's done editorially, that editorial arrangement, how photo buyers, photo editors need to have photographs so the viewer of that magazine turns the page, so that the story can unfold page by page by page. And the way that those elements are arranged to make that flow happen often don't fit the rules that you hear talked about a lot. Now, there's two things about this. One, or maybe more than two, but one, You have to first start understanding these ways that editorial content is arranged to tell a story as you unfold a page. You have to be part of that marketplace. You have to not sell that single photograph, that stock image, but you have to be an active participant in writing articles and illustrating them and then sending those in, which is, of course, 100%, a risky proposition. One that you're more or less guaranteed to get rejected at some point, if not many points, if not most of the time, because you're learning, because you don't understand, you don't know these different ways of arranging elements visually. So a viewer in a magazine will sit there and turn that page. But if you don't take that step and don't send that in and then follow up and ask why, because just that, the rejection letter is not where you stop. You have to sit and reach out and go, well, what didn't work? And what did work? And it's from that you start learning from the best in the business, when it comes to visual storytelling, how to visually communicate what worked and didn't work in your photographs. So, can I give you an example? Yeah, I had an example come up this past week, which of course kind of gave me the impetus for this whole podcast. We were working up in Skagit Valley, which that's a whole nother lot of storytelling why we were there, but had an opportunity, even though it had been raining for 72 hours plus straight, as in nonstop rain, to work with some short-eared owls, a bird that I've wanted to photograph for a long time on the wing. And as owls will do, they tend to tee up, look over the situation, then when they start seeing movement, they become active hunters. Now, in this process came up the conversation with the people I was with, and that's, of course, how you learn is with that conversation. It's a two-way street. You go on a workshop, and if you expect the instructor just to sit there and drool on forever with this, that, and the other, you have no idea if you're going to ever get the answer you need. And of course, the answer that you need to ask is hard to come by, but if you don't ask, the conversation doesn't start, you don't get what you need. And it's the same with that photograph. And in this case, we had this short-eared owl that was just soaking wet. And owls are just pathetic when they're soaking wet, because there's so little body and so much feather that, there's like a ragamuffin when they're wet. And so there it was, teed up on this pole, gray skies, horrible, horrible background, not really great light. So I'm overexposing over a plus one whole stop just to make something happen. And then I put the bird way on the side of the frame. And the question was, well, why did you shoot horizontal and put them way on the side of the frame instead of shooting vertical? Well, the answer for myself was very simple, editorial. Because if I'm going to write an article about Skagit Valley, and, it's northwestern Washington, and it rains in the wintertime, that's the nature of the beast. If you want to talk about, in that photograph, a wet owl visually, and then, of course, give the photo buyer and then the editor space to put the text for the beginning of that article, and you want to get that double truck because that 2-page spread pays a whole lot more than a little quarter-page insertion, then you have to shoot the photograph that gives them that space to do that. Now, at the same time, when you do that, and you think about it, and you arrange your elements editorially, what happens to the actual photograph if it never gets used in a magazine? Well, then what happens a lot of times is all of a sudden your imagination is allowed to wander. You're allowed to see things, and as people often do, read things into the situation which can and cannot be there. It's a game of perceptions and reality. The reality was it was a really wet, soaking wet day of miserable dampness and cold, and the owl was showing it in his face and gesture that if I hadn't arranged elements the way I had, if I gotten really tight on them, then you wouldn't got the sense or the feeling of that really wet, gray sky that's predominant in the photograph because I shot horizontal, put him on the side. Now he looks like a small, wet, drowning feathered rat rather than a really cool short-eared owl. So arranging elements editorial. Is there a book for this? No. Are there magazine articles? You look in places where you wouldn't look if you're a photographer. You might find some. So then where would you find examples of this, a way of arranging elements that would help you in your photography grow? Well, that's the two-edged sword, because the more you look in magazines, not talking about books, talking about magazines, the more you look at them, the more you'll start seeing the way particular photo editors like to tell their story visually. And as you see that more, two things happen. One, you start getting ideas what work for your own visual storytelling. The methods, the layout, the way you want to arrange elements that would work. At the same time, you start understanding the way that particular person who buys photographs likes to see their information presented in a photograph. So then if it's a magazine you want to submit to, because this is a round-robin affair, as you sit there and look at those photographs, understand how they want them to tell the story, then when you present that to them, the chances of your getting your work and article published go up exponentially. And then when you send in that submission to them and you've done this homework, what happens? Then you get to have the conversation, whether you win or lose. You get that conversation. You simply say to them, hey, I looked at your magazine. I studied it for a while. I took these photographs because I saw what you were doing and trying to do it. And, well, tell me what didn't work. Oh, man, when you tell them that you've looked at their magazine and you've done this, the conversations, they can last hours. I'm telling you from personal experience, they can last uncomfortably for hours. Your bladder's about to burst and you're still talking and it's a great conversation, but oh man, that coffee could have waited. I mean, that's what happens when you just start there and do a little homework, think about it, and perhaps arrange the elements in your image to tell a story to a greater audience. Because remember that magazines, the majority of magazines that are out there don't go to photographers. They go to, basic people with basic needs and wants and desires and want to be entertained who know nothing about f-stop, shutter speeds, depth of focus, or what you should and should not do in a photograph. They just know what they like and what grabs their heartstrings and interest. And that's what these photo buyers are so good at helping us with, is to weed past so much of this BS that's out there. And this last week, boy, there's a couple things out there that I'm like, I can't believe people, first of all, read this, and two, believe it. It's just horrible information. Photography is such a simple, simplistic art form, which when done with that intention, can reach out and grab folks. And as you and I both know, while I say it's simplistic, there's a lot involved, but when you look at the final photograph, you don't see all that. All you see is that simplicity. And that's when you know that when it comes to your photograph, you've editorially arranged the elements just to simply speak, tell your story. And that's really what it's all about in photography, is telling your story about that subject that you want people to know. Hey, we're going through the year. There's a lot of great events coming up, everything from air shows to Bedford Camera's PhotoCon, another great event to help you understand more about your camera and to define your voice as a photographer. So I can't encourage you enough to head to bedfords.com and to check it out. As well as, I've got some new classes up on Kelby One. I've got my class on basic biology and using that to improve your wildlife photography, because so many are really good wildlife photographers. I'd love to help you take it to the next level. As well as the next level of my airshow photography class, which is really thinking as much about, again, placing the elements in that frame to tell a story as the editor would like, as much as some technical stuff. So check this all out. Keep it in mind as you go out shooting. And remember to make every click your story.